A gentle glow of scented candles flickered against the walls, illuminating the room in a dim manner. I had not anticipated the day to unfold in this manner. It all began with a simple favor, nothing more. The burden of life had been weighing heavily on me, and my back had been aching for days. I initially hesitated when he extended an offer of assistance. However, he was so casual about it and so insistent that a decent massage would do wonders that it felt strange. In all honesty, I required the alleviation. His hands tenderly kneaded away the tension as I lay down, pressing against my shoulders. Initially, it was nothing extraordinary. The rhythmic motion and soothing pressure alleviated the tension in my muscles. However, as the minutes elapsed, something changed. His touch was distinct, more deliberate. The energy that neither of us acknowledged but both felt was unspeakable. I closed my eyes, attempting to concentrate on the relaxation and the simple fact that he was assisting me. However, my pulse betrayed me, beating slightly too rapidly. The slow movements along my back, the warmth of his palms, caused a shiver to run down my spine. I assured myself that it was merely the sensation, the contrast of warmth against my skin. However, an unanswered question persisted in my consciousness. Was I the sole individual experiencing this? The silence between us became increasingly oppressive. I knew at that moment as his fingertips traced down my spine, and my breath hitched slightly. This was no longer a straightforward massage. I was unsure of what would transpire next as something had altered. I endeavored to regulate my respiration by convincing myself that I was overthinking the situation. It was merely a massage. Nothing more, nothing less. But the deliberate and slow movement of his fingertips conveyed a different narrative. His touch was characterized by a certain degree of hesitancy, as if he were equally cognizant of the unspoken change between us. The silence that had settled so heavily in the room was so oppressive that I longed to speak. However, the words would not emerge. Rather, I concentrated on the warmth of his palms and the way his fingertips penetrated the knots along my spine. It was both soothing and comforting, yet it also left me feeling unsettled in a manner that I was unable to articulate. I reflected on the circumstances that led us to this location in the first place. The perpetual tension, the extended workdays, and his casual recommendation of a massage to alleviate my anxiety. At the time, it appeared to be innocuous, a modest act. However, the air between us now felt charged with each passing second, as if we were both anticipating something that neither of us could identify. His hands lowered, exerting an appropriate amount of pressure on the small of my back. I was unable to prevent the gentle sigh from escaping me. Immediately, I perceived his hands briefly halt before proceeding as if nothing had transpired. However, I was aware that he had observed. The room's tension intensified. I desired to turn around and gaze into his eyes to determine whether I was hallucinating the entire situation. However, I was unable to do so. I was convinced that there would be no turning back once I made the decision. Each second felt longer than the previous one as the silence persisted. My mind was ablaze with inquiries that I was uncertain I wished to have definitive answers to. Was it solely my experience, or did he also experience this? And if he was, what did it imply? Before I could even begin to organize my thoughts, I sensed his fingertips lingering for an extra second, and his hands were slowing down. I felt a tremor as he touched my skin, causing it to tingle. I was aware that I should respond, shrug it off, and restore the situation to its original state. However, I was unable to do so. Something had transpired, and for the first time, I was uncertain whether I wished it to revert to its previous state. The room appeared to be smaller, and the air was denser, as if it were charged with a presence that neither of us had previously expressed. Although my heartbeat was consistent, each second seemed to drag on as if time had paused. His hands hesitated for an insufficient amount of time before gradually withdrawing, as if uncertain about whether to proceed or cease entirely. However, the harm had already been inflicted. The moment had changed, and there was no longer any room for deception. I forced myself to inhale forcefully in an effort to alleviate my confusion. Maybe I was hallucinating it. It is possible that exhaustion was deceiving me, creating an illusion. I was aware, however, that this was not accurate. The halt, the hesitation, the manner in which his hands had moved. It was genuine. Indeed, I was not the sole individual who observed this. I turned my head slightly, just enough to capture a glimpse of him. Despite the fact that his eyes were fixed and his visage was unreadable, there was a distinct quality to them. A brief moment of uncertainty, or was it something else entirely? I was uncertain. Would you like me to cease? His voice was composed and cautious, as if he were also evaluating the gravity of the situation. I hesitated. The reasonable response was affirmative. I should sit up, change the subject, and claim that none of this had occurred. And I should not. However, my body remained motionless, betraying me. I was not yet prepared to relocate. He exhaled gently, as if he had been holding his breath in anticipation of my response. And then, without another word, he shifted back slightly, his hands pressing into my shoulders once more, this time with a gentler, more cautious touch. The tension persisted, unspoken yet undeniable. The silence between us was more resonant than any words. Each of my thoughts veered in a different direction, urging me to address a question that I was uncertain about. Was this merely a period of uncertainty? A benign misunderstanding? Or had we entered a territory that we were unable to reclaim? A sudden external noise, such as the sound of a door closing or distant footsteps, abruptly interrupted my musings. Reality returned abruptly, accompanied by a surge of lucidity. I immediately sat up, wrapping the blanket around me as if it could protect me from the impact of the event that had just occurred. His expression was once again inscrutable as he leaned back. However, there was something peculiar about his pupils. An inquiry that remains unresolved. An idea that remains unspoken. Although the moment had passed, the sentiment persisted. I was aware that the situation would never be the same again, regardless of how hard I tried. The silence between us was prolonged, surpassing the appropriate duration. Despite his departure, I could still detect the warmth of his palms on my skin. I refrained from gazing at him, despite the fact that my heart was throbbing. Should I do so, I was aware that I would observe something in his gaze that I was not prepared to confront. I tightened the blanket more tightly around myself, as if this would eliminate the sensation and restore everything to its original state. However, I was aware that the notion of normalcy had already dissipated. The magnitude of the event that had transpired between us was as if it were a secret that neither of us desired to disclose. He shifted slightly beside me, clearing his throat. It is likely that I should. He initiated the conversation, however, his speech unraveled. I immediately nodded, eager to occupy the void with something, anything that would alleviate the intensity of this moment. Yes. I believe that is a sound strategy. I was surprised by the stability of my voice. However, neither of us made any movement. The air was thick with unspoken words, with questions that we were not yet prepared to pose. After stealing a glimpse at him, I discovered that he was already gazing at me. His expression conveyed something. Uncertainty. Reluctance. However, there is also an additional factor. Something that caused my intestines to twist in ways that I was unable to comprehend. I opened my mouth to speak in order to alleviate the tension. However, his phone vibrated on the table before I could respond. The sound abruptly brought us both back to our senses. He blinking as if he were awakening from a trance, he swiftly reached for it. I observed his expression change in an instant as he looked at the screen. His fingers gripped the phone with an excessive amount of force, causing his mandible to tighten. There was an error. All is well. I inquired with great caution. He hesitated before shaking his head. Yes. I should depart. His movements were even more hurried than his remarks. He swiftly rose from his seat, dodging my gaze as he retrieved his outerwear. My stomach contorted once more, but this time for an entirely distinct reason. There was an issue. There was an abrupt change in his demeanor. It was as though the moment we had just shared had been erased, and it was supplanted by something more substantial. I desired to inquire, to insist on answers, however I refrained from doing so. Rather, I observed him as he approached the door, his posture rigid and his shoulders tense. He briefly paused, as if he were contemplating a matter, and then exhaled forcefully. He opened the door and vanished into the night without saying a word. The room became increasingly frigid the moment he departed. I sat there, my mind racing as I gazed at the vacant space he had left behind. What had just transpired? What was he concealing? Also, why did it seem as though this was not yet concluded, despite the circumstances? My fingers hovered over the screen as I reached for my phone. I intended to send him a text message to inquire about his well-being. However, before I could act, an additional thought entered my consciousness. What if I was not prepared for the response? I gazed at my phone, my forefinger hovering over his name, contemplating whether or not to send a message. Letting it go would be the logical course of action, as it would be as though nothing had occurred. However, I was uneasy with the manner in which he departed. It was not merely discomfort or regret. It was something more profound, something that I was unable to articulate. I was unable to escape the sensation that something was amiss, despite the passage of minutes. The abrupt alteration in his demeanor, the tight hold he had on his phone, and the tension in his voice. I found myself replaying the events in my mind, as if they were a conundrum that I was unable to solve. I exhaled, placing my phone down, and persuaded myself that perhaps I was overanalyzing the situation. However, my phone vibrated just as I was about to divert my attention with something else. My heart leaped in anticipation, anticipating that it would be him. However, this was not the case. The message was transmitted by an unlisted number. Initially, I suspected that it was spam. However, upon reading the text, a shiver went down my spine. Stay away from him. That concluded the matter. No name, no context. My mind was sent into a tailspin by this warning. I reread the message with trembling fingertips. I experienced abdominal constriction. This was not an accident. An individual had been monitoring the situation. An individual was aware of information that I was unaware of. My pulse increased as I forced down a hard swallow. I contemplated ignoring it, deleting it, or simply claiming that I had never seen it. However, I was unable to do so. I had a feeling that this was only the beginning. I exhaled deeply and proceeded with the only logical course of action. I contacted him. The telephone sounded 3 times, twice, and once. With each passing second, my anxiety increased. Then, just as I was convinced that he would not answer, he did. Greetings. His tone was taut and reserved. I hesitated. Are you in good health? He sighed, the sound ponderous and filled with something I couldn't quite place, and for a moment I thought he had hung up. However, there was silence on the other end. Did you receive a message? Finally, he said. I was unable to exhale. How are you aware of this? Additional silence. Apprehension. Then at last he spoke again, this time with a subdued voice. Pay attention. I require your confidence. Please refrain from responding to it. Refrain from taking any action. Ignore it. His words elicited an additional sense of unease within me. Who is the sender? I inquired, my hand grasping the phone more tightly. He exhaled another exhalation, this time more agitated. I am unable to provide an explanation at this time. However, I urge you to refrain from becoming embroiled. I was experiencing a state of restlessness. I have already become committed. A prolonged period of silence. Subsequently, he made a statement that caused my blood to freeze just prior to concluding the call. Asking inquiries is not advisable. Then the queue abruptly terminated. The call concluded abruptly, leaving me with more questions than answers, causing my heart to pound as I gazed at my phone. His words reverberated in my consciousness. It is not advisable for you to inquire, but how could I simply relinquish the matter? The message was sent to me by an individual for a specific purpose. Someone requested that I refrain from approaching him. However, what is the reason? I was unable to think clearly when I hurriedly snatched my jacket and exited the building. I required answers, and I was not prepared to wait for them to present themselves. I was aware of his residence. I simply had to engage in a face-to-face conversation with him and request that he provide an explanation of the situation. As I approached his residence, the streets were ominously silent. The lights inside his vehicle were off, despite the fact that it was situated in the front. I briefly hesitated, questioning my decision. It is possible that this was an error. It is possible that I should have paid attention. However, I was unable to return to my position as I observed movement in the vicinity of the window. A silhouette. He was within. My pulse was racing as I emerged from my vehicle. I began to knock gently as I approached the door, but when there was no response, I intensified my efforts. I am the one who called out. Silence. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, the door squeaked open. His body was tense and his expression was inscrutable as he stood there. He stated with a subdued voice, "You should not be present." I pushed past him and entered the building. "It is imperative that you inform me of the situation." He let out a sigh as he ran his hand through his hair. "Complicated." Subsequently, I responded by simplifying the situation. "Someone cautioned me to avoid you. You informed me that it is not advisable to pose questions. What are you concealing?" He hesitated before finally speaking. "I should not be a source of fear for you." My respiration was temporarily interrupted. Subsequently, who? His phone vibrated before he could respond. As he regarded the screen, his complexion became paler. He directed it towards me and my stomach plummeted. It was an additional missive. "You should have heeded." Then the power was cut before I could react. The room was enveloped in darkness, and for a brief period, neither of us moved. I struggled to hear any sound beyond our own respiration, and my breath caught in my throat. The air was now heavier, imbued with an unseen presence that caused my skin to tingle. He firmly grasped my wrist, but his clasp was not forcible. "It is imperative that we depart immediately." I was overcome with a sense of panic. "Where should you travel? What is transpiring?" He declined to respond. Rather, he dragged me towards the back door, his movement swift and urgent. My heart was beating so loudly that it overpowered all sanity, and I was unable to keep pace. My face was immediately chilled by the cool night air as we emerged from the building. However, the oppressive sense of peril persisted. We were not able to travel very far before the headlamps of a vehicle on the street flashed. It was not previously located in that location. My pulse increased. We were being observed by an individual. The entire time, an individual had been monitoring the situation. He clenched my hand even more tightly as he swore under his breath, "Please enter my vehicle." I hesitated. "Let me know the situation first." His mandible contracted. "It is not solely about me. Additionally, it pertains to you." His gaze fixed on mine as he exhaled abruptly. "The individual who transmitted those messages does not wish for you to be aware of the truth. Indeed, that is the reason they are present." I felt a shiver down my spine. "Then inform me of the truth." He cast a gaze at the vehicle that was traveling down the street. The engine commenced to operate with a grumble. He had run out of time. Our allotted time had expired. He shook his head. "It is safest to remain unaware of certain matters." I desired to dispute, to demand the answers that I had invested so much effort in obtaining. However, I was aware of this fact at my core. The magnitude of the event exceeded my capacity, greater than the combined size of both of us. He took a step back, his eyes fixed on something that I was unable to discern. Regret? Fear? It is possible that both are true. Return to your residence. Ignore this. Like what you heard. There's plenty more heartbreak and secrets to come. Hit like, subscribe, and stay curious with Tangled Truths.